pleasure to introduce Dr. Charles Bazerman, one of the world's leading experts on writing. He has contributed significantly to the establishment of writing as an international, interdisciplinary research field. He was the initiator and one of the main promoters of cross-disciplinary international dialogues in the Writing Across Borders conferences. He has traveled extensively and has worked with colleagues from different Latin American countries such as Colombia, Chile, Brazil, and Mexico, especially Puebla. His best-known work is on genre studies and the rhetoric of science, using socially based theories of genre, activity system, interaction, intertextuality, and cognitive development. He investigates the history of scientific writing and other forms of writing and the relationship of writing to the development of the disciplines. He is interested in the practice and teaching of writing, understood in a socio-historic context, and has contributed to the teaching and learning of writing at all levels of schooling. Charles Bazerman believes firmly in open access and makes accessible and available as much of his work as possible, and also supports the aggregation and dissemination of other colleagues' research on writing. He's a professor of education at the University of California, Santa Barbara, where he served as chair of the program in education for 8 years. He is the author of 20 books and over 20 edited collections and numerous books, chapters, and articles. It is a real privilege to have you here.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure and an honor to see you again, and thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you all the organizers of this conference, a really wonderful conference that is bringing together many, many scholars and teachers, educators from across Latin America, and it's truly impressive. Today I'm going to be talking about some recent research that I need to pick up the manuscript. So I can remember what it is I'm supposed to talk about. So I'm going to be talking about some recent research and putting it in a little bit of a context. And it follows up on themes that we've already heard in the first day's talks. And in a way, what I'm going to be talking about is what we as teachers already know, but I'm just making it a little bit more explicit and actually bringing some evidence to what we know. In many cultures throughout the world, reading and writing have long been associated with intellectual development and cultivated minds. The ability to write is given even greater intellectual status than just reading, because it makes one not just a receiver of that tradition, knowledgeable in the wisdom of a culture, but also allows one to contribute to it, to make the public culture. Particularly as universities have become research institutions in the last 2 centuries, writing has become more prized, more valuable. Actually, for the first century, 5 centuries or so, universities were primarily reading institutions where people would interpret the great works of the past, the classic works, and give lectures on them, and the students would be given oral examinations on the readings. But university examinations now have moved from the oral to the written. Seminar papers, term papers, other forms of student writing have become more central to the activities of learning as well as to the means of assessment. This growth of writing in the academy has accompanied changes in society requiring more writing. There are more writing professions, such as authors of books and journalists, lawyers. Lawyers have now spend more of their time on paperwork than they do on arguing in court. despite television shows. And as print, this is especially speeded up as print and paper became cheaper and reading became a general leisure activity in the 19th and 20th centuries. So, and large corporations have grown and become organized around their files and various documents, their memos, plans, written communications. Research professions that have grown the last century. Government, other bureaucracies run on procedures, reports, records, and democratic participation requires more information and more statements, more opportunities for people to speak their mind and have their voices heard. Even voting is a kind of inscription, even just checking off, you are marking down your preference, but there are many other opportunities to have a much more extensive statement. So in the last 2 decades especially, the internet and globalization have increased these trends even further. So now, at the end of education, students to participate in society need to have developed the ability to be articulate writers in multiple media, in multiple social domains. Now for schooling, that has meant that writing must extend far beyond the basics of correct and accurate transcription, spelling, handwriting, grammar, which may have sufficed when school was centrally focused on reproduction of received knowledge. In fact, in the 17th and 18th centuries, in the United States, the schools taught reading. Writing, you went to a separate school, and that was handwriting. So, but now students must be able to write extended individual statements, incorporate information, come to fresh conclusions founded on reason and evidence. Students need to learn to compose and argue for ideas based on critical and analytical reasoning in accordance with the expectations and demands of specialized spheres of practice, whether academic disciplines, financial reporting, journalism, the law, public debate. These issues of critical and analytical writing are not just matters for higher education, as the complex skills of writing require many years to master. We do know by shared experience that critical, analytical, theoretical reasoning continues over many years. You develop of this over many years, and it's not a small set of skills that you can master quickly in one term's course. Unlike spelling or handwriting, which you actually, if you have decent schooling and you're paying attention, within a couple of years you've mastered. You might learn fine calligraphy later on, but really, after a couple of years you have the basics and you don't grow a lot with that. Much of the university curriculum has been to provide the experiences for helping to carry along your critical analytical thinking, but of course it's not the end of it, and we hope it's not the beginning, but it's an important transition phase. And even then, even if somebody has had rigorous undergraduate writing experiences, still if they go to a postgraduate program, they still have many new challenges to face, and even when they finish their postgraduate program and go to the professional world, they have to start learning again. I've heard students complain at each of these junctures about, I thought I knew how to write. So new skills are learned throughout academic and professional careers, and often it's people in their in the latter parts of their careers that are really seen as the most skilled, until the point of age like me that you start losing some of your mental capacities, then it's downhill again. Because of the difficulty of learning to write cognitively challenging texts, the pressure to introduce complex writing tasks has pushed downwards from the highest levels of postgraduate work to undergraduate work to secondary and now even primary work. I think this is one of the interesting dynamics you see happening in many societies. And sometimes it starts from the bottom up, but the demand sometimes is seen culturally from the top down, and the social problem is realized when you see people who completed their postgraduate work or completed their undergraduate work and then have to face challenging tests and not prepared for it. In a way, it's like the work that Paula has been showing throughout Latin America about the difficulties that are recognized at the postgraduate level. But this is like somebody coming to the doctor's office when they're near death. It has been the problems going on for years and years and years, and then they come and there's bleeding everywhere. It is much better to start with a healthy diet and exercise and proper training and proper medication from early on. And I think societies are starting to recognize it, so it's the problem point then reaches back down to earlier parts of the curriculum when you realize it's not something that can be learned simply through a patch at the end. Okay. So, in a number of Latin American countries, there has been especially growing concern to support undergraduate and postgraduate students writing in first and second language. Initiatives have developed here in Mexico, in Argentina, Colombia, Chile, Brazil, and other places. At another session later today, some of my colleagues will be presenting findings from the ILIS projects, the Iniciativas de Lectura y Escritura en la Educación Superior in America Latina. It's a project which is now documenting the growing research and practice networks in higher education writing. There is an opportunity at the website, we'll be talking that for you to report the experiences at your universities, if you haven't done so already. Or if you've received an invitation and have not yet responded to the invitation, we encourage you to do it. We are starting to get the first results from it, and we will be sharing some of that today. At the same time, there has been increasing recognition that at the same time as been work on writing, recognition that personal development is also tied to writing development, whether it is for personal play, social communication, expression, storytelling, identity formation. These personal uses of writing are emotionally rewarding for each of the youngest students and can be motivated to help students through the hard work of learning the transcription system and then learning to compose relevant meanings of ever greater length, complexity, and organization. And this is an area where actually scholars from Latin America have been very influential for many decades with emergent literacies, in contributing to our understanding of emergent literacies. Let me just add, it's not in my script, but I've been thinking about this for a while and reading a lot recently. We sometimes think of these personal uses of writing as separate from the professional. But professional writing, even as objective professions as you can imagine, is highly emotional because people love their work. They believe in their findings. They are committed to what they are doing. They have formed their identities within these professions. And also, even when you, the modern research on the brain and the brain and the body is showing the deep connections between our reasons and our emotions, and the way emotions serve to guide, to direct our reason, and to also provide judgments. Highly skilled, better than we can think. Emotions allow us to think better than we can think. So these functions of writing are actually not separate, but we need to think about how they work together. But how do we connect these two sets of motive for writing? Presumably in the middle years of schooling, when students are entering their early adolescent years. At that age, young people are engaged in complex problems of expanding social engagement and identity formation, an extension of their early motives for writing, but are now complicated by peer group formations and gender relations. Even as we heard yesterday, that at the 4th grade, students have to start dealing with subject matter and subject matter vocabularies and new kinds of uses of language that they find challenging at the same time as they start entering adolescence and forming new identities. At the same age when their hormones are racing, their prefrontal cortexes are also growing, that part of the brain associated with critical and analytical thinking, as well as the construction of larger cognitive structures. These are the kinds of mental faculties that are typically associated with the reasoned writing of more advanced education and professional life, even as people continue to develop their personal and social uses, identities, and satisfactions of writing. Now, I don't have full answers to this conundrum today. It's not the primary topic of my talk, but I want to raise it to identify the importance of the topic I will discuss, and to suggest why those of you engaged in writing in earlier education might be interested in the kinds of findings I will be presenting, which is at the higher education, actually early postgraduate level. But again, this is something that starts, this reasoned writing, information-based writing, intertextual writing, starts early on, and it's a matter of, and the better preparation students have at that level, the more they will be prepared and will not be bleeding all over the place when they get to the doctorate. I also would want, well, I think, I will continue. I will stop digressing. The new Common Core standards in the United States do not, this is thinking about middle school again, do not propose a progression sequence. They do propose a progression sequence that will prepare students on these intellectual paths, although it's not a theoretically grounded or research-based as we hope it might be in some years. And in fact, a number of U.S. scholars are starting to meet to start to develop some model of lifespan development, or at least ways of thinking about lifespan development. Too much our thinking has been separated at different age levels, without realizing that the same person with emergent literacy 20 years later will be dealing with the doctoral dissertation. Right? But it is the same person. The research that I will be presenting today examines the relation of writing and cognitive development in postgraduate students just 22 or 23 years old. However, the findings of my research team suggest the kinds of processes that can begin much earlier, and thus the kinds of writing activities that might be introduced at an earlier age in age-appropriate ways to foster cognitive growth. And let me do add at this point that they are finding that at early adolescence, the prefrontal cortex grows. Now, some people say, oh, well, we shouldn't be very cognitively demanding at this point because they're just learning. There's also commodulation. That's when things that will fire together, wire together. If you have heard that expression, where your neurons start to develop clustered pathways. I would say not that we don't engage in demanding cognitive thought, but we demand as much as we can, because that's when it's important to help the brain grow in relationship to tasks. We don't ask for the impossible, but we should ask for the challenging. So, in order to know how we can introduce more cognitively, so there are Common Core standards that are being introduced in the United States. In order to understand how we can introduce more cognitively complex, reasoned, and evidence-based writing, and why we should, it's useful to understand more about the relationship between writing development and cognitive development. However, despite the deep cultural belief and strong teacher experience of that connection between challenging forms of writing and the development of thinking, our research knowledge about this relation is quite limited. There has been some work on what is called writing to learn, but this has been largely focused on rote memory tasks. So it's now been well established that activities that require things, rote memory practice like note-taking, outlining, answering study questions can improve memories of relevant facts and scores on texts of recall. There's been much less definitive work establishing the relationship of writing and higher order thinking. Establishing those relationships is harder because thinking leads people to individual conclusions that are not so easily assessed as fact memory. You learn to think for yourself. Further, writing varies from, so if you give people a test to ask if they're thinking, everybody should have a different answer. Makes it very hard for psychometricians. Further, writing varies from domain to domain, as thinking in history is not the same as thinking about a literary text, or physics, or political. Politicians think too. Sometimes we may doubt it, but they are thinking very hard in their own way. So there's no one model of correct, critical, analytical, synthetic argument or creative reasoning, though we might be tempted to think so. Rather, it's embedded in fields of practice, as Paula was telling us yesterday. General models of cognitive complexity, like Bloom's taxonomy of learning objectives, which distinguishes knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, evaluation, can only provide very broad stroke characterizations that really are not very useful in helping researchers parse gradual growth in thinking, especially when you get past the very beginnings, because everything will be in the upper categories. But then how do we account for all the growth that occurs after 8th grade when everybody can do the whole Bloom's taxonomy by 8th grade? Thus, unlike correct spelling or identifying facts, identifying cognitive growth is elusive, highly situated, and then with multiple possibilities in each constrained situation. Not every lawyer, doctor, or professor thinks exactly the same way, so that's why you have arguments, different opinions, and you have to listen and evaluate each other's arguments. And then they look at the opinions in relationship to specific cases, and each case has complications and variations. So you have situated cognition within situated disciplines, elaborating points of view of individuals. How do we know which view is more evolved and advanced? Except by invoking the same kinds of complex situated disciplinary reasoning we are trying to measure. Further, the way we typically could assess reasoning in higher cognitive functions, if we had the measures, would be through their expressions in writing. So it's difficult to separate the thinking from the writing in order to establish a relationship. Is somebody a good writer or a good thinker? Or what is the relationship between the two? Here we will present a set of studies on a group of postgraduate students within teacher formation that tries to overcome these difficulties to isolate some of the factors that seem associated with advancing their thinking. These are factors specifically about the nature of the writing tests they engage in and the way they pursue these tests. We find correlations, such as if they fulfill certain expectations of the writing or pursue it in such ways, they show more cognitive gains according to the discipline of the profession, the goals of the programs, and the specifics of the assignment. So these are not general cognition, these are ethnographically, locally identified cognitive goals. They're learning to think the way the program is encouraging them to learn to think. The factors we display here in discipline-specific, what we look at here also may be appropriate to think about school curriculum, middle schools and high schools, and maybe even in upper elementary. Now, our study was situated within a 12-month postgraduate teacher education program at a major university in California. This is the best we can do to hide. Because in California, teachers earn their teacher credential after completing a traditional undergraduate major in any major. So it's obviously within the California credential system. The teacher credential requirements include coursework, internship, classroom teaching experience, and a teaching portfolio that include videotapes of lesson segments and written commentaries by the teacher candidate. Candidates in this teacher preparation program, therefore, already were successful graduates from major universities and were skilled enough academic writers to establish good records to be admitted into an elite program. So they already knew how, by some sense, they already knew how to write and to think at a high level. However, they had little prior training in how to think and make decisions like a teacher. This was new to them, and they had little experience in the classroom. So the domain of teacher cognition was largely new to them. Particularly the version of teacher cognition that was fostered in this program. We collected data on the program over 2 cycles, 2 years, following 2 cohorts, focusing on the program to prepare secondary teachers, although there was also a primary group, with particular attention to the English and language arts students for middle and high school. So there was math education, science education. We focused on just the English language arts teachers, the English teachers. The first year of our study, we collected ethnographic data in the program and the coursework to determine the values of the program, the curricular design, particular classroom assignments, and the factors that seem to contribute to students' abilities to develop the kind of thinking valued in the program. The second year focused on the spoken and written discourse of a small group of students as they progressed through the program. So the first year was to locate ourselves ethnographically. The second year was to focus on students. From the first year's ethnographic study, we found that the program leaders sought to develop inquiry-driven, reflective practitioners based on evidence gathered from classroom experience. And all other goals were secondary to this primary one. 3 major writing experiences supported the primary goal by asking the teacher candidates to make sense of classroom experiences, the behavior of the students, and their choice of teachers, that is to develop teacher cognition. We actually have several kinds of data we collected here, but the first one is called the Hiding Out Project, where this takes the term hiding out from a particular author named Brozo, who said there are certain students who try to hide the fact that they can't read, and they engage in a variety of behaviors in order to hide the fact. Sometimes they make a lot of trouble, sometimes they literally hide behind their desk. They do many different things, but they are all hiding the fact that they cannot read. Okay. And so they were asked to look at, the teacher candidates were asked to look at 2 students they met in their internships when they were doing student teaching, and 2 students who were hiding out, who were avoiding reading tasks. And then they had to just go and find out what was really happening with these students. Not just that they were bad students, but why they couldn't read or why they didn't want to read in these circumstances. What were their skills and what were their prior experiences, learn their whole story. And see them as struggling students. That's the idea. Then they had to write up what they learned about these 2 students. The second major assignment was a thing called the PAC, the teaching portfolio, which was a video, and that was done about 2/3 of the way through the program. There was a video of the teaching around which there were many commentaries, written commentaries. What were your lesson plans? Why did you plan it that way? What happened in class? How do you interpret it? Etc. Many different commentaries. The final assignment was their thesis, which was due in June. Okay. This was an action research thesis. It involved collecting data from all their student teaching throughout the year, and these were called artifacts. They would collect artifacts from their teaching, and they were to think through a set of problems that interested them over the course of the year. And they would bring these together in an overall narrative tied to their professional literature and showing their overall trajectory of understanding. So the first artifacts collected in the early part of the year were talked about the way they were thinking about in the beginning. And then they said, I thought about it this way, and then I collected my second artifact to solve the next problem, and then I learned more and collected my third artifact. So you have embedded a kind of historical timeline of cognitive development in the final document, which has a wraparound narrative. So in the second year, we collected these major assignments from all the English language arts candidates, and we looked at 6 in greater depth. We also collected classroom discussions, blogs, other papers from various times of the year. Okay. We developed a set of codes to analyze it. These codes initially grew out of our interviews with the various stakeholders, with the designers of the program, the teachers, and also the students' experiences. But then we refined them, we semi-grounded them in the actual reading of the scripts and the transcripts that were the primary data. They're not meant to be general for all education or all cognition. They are meant to be very specific to the program. The program encouraged students to move in their reflections from individualistic, monocausal explanations of events based on stable moralistic characterizations. That is what we call fixed characteristics. Good student, bad student, hard worker, lazy, right? Those kinds of characterizations. 2, complex, interactive explanations of people making motivated choices and responses to the situation and unfolding events. So, starting because there things influence students, educational settings are reactive, they're complex, they're dynamic, that people learn to work in dynamic systems, and everybody actually thinks about the best way to survive in those systems. So we're moving from simple characterizations to complex characterizations of both students and teachers. So, when we applied these codes to the different assignments, you don't have to interpret the whole thing. The thing I just want to point out is that there were different patterns of thought in the different assignments. So in the hiding out paper, you had a lot of 5, 6, 7s. In the teaching portfolio, you had a lot of 5s and some 7s. In the MED, in the thing at the end of the year, which had the most reflective overview of the whole thing, you had a lot of 7s, 8s, 9s. Okay, so each assignment has its characteristic. Some of that is time related. It's hard to distinguish what is genre versus what is time. But they certainly are distinctive. Don't worry about the lessons, 2 columns. They're just from the talk and from their blogs. Even within the same assignment, the different sections had their characteristic forms of thought. So in the teaching portfolio, in the planning, you had lots of 5s. But in the overall reflection, you got a lot of 8s and 9s. Another way to look is compare the way 5s vary across the different sections. Okay, so in a way it's simple. Different assignments or parts of assignments, different sections of genres ask you to think about different things. They create a problem space, and in solving the problem, you have to think certain thoughts. And so, writing helps you think certain thoughts, as defined by the assignment. This is why it's important to write your assignments carefully, so that students don't take the easy option and only one or two very ambitious ones turn to something interesting. If you shape the assignments to encourage more of the kind of thought you want, you'll get more of the kind of thought you want. Further, as students gain practice in these forms of writing, this is in the MED, and MED is similar. Again, I use emphasis on the conclusion sections, moves to high levels. As they gain practice in these forms of writing, required reflection in the classroom, their ability to make sophisticated judgments improve. Okay, so as I said, it's hard to disaggregate genre from time in the program. But as I told you about the artifacts, they wrote about the first artifacts at the beginning of the year. Essentially, they wrote the same kind of section throughout the year. So you could see the sophistication of the way they presented each of the artifacts. So the first artifact is the dark one. The final artifacts are the light color ones. Notice that there was a migration towards the higher end in the final artifacts. Okay, so the students seem to get more sophisticated in the way they approach these. But of course, the artifacts are very close to the evidentiary level of what was happening in the classroom, so things like reactiveness in the classroom still remain pretty high. So it's within the genre, which is not the highest, which is not the genre that evokes the highest comments. But even within that one task, there's a change. So, and then we looked at students had individual patterns of how this worked out. There were 3 of the 6 students who had a generally upward trend of producing more cognitively sophisticated perceptions of classroom interaction as the year progressed, though differently paced. One was slower development and needed more scaffolded support. Actually, this has turned out to be quite interesting. As you see what we get to the evidence part, but this was a student who was having a hard time in the classroom and therefore could not think about did not yet know how to think about the classroom and was just overwhelmed. So started out well, and then the thinking started sliding because they did not get a handle on it. It took them several years of revising their thesis to get an MA to complete it. There were 2 people who were started out higher. One was struggling with a question that led them to think about the lower level things. So, what is your responsibility as a student? What about students who shirk their responsibility? And he was trying to come to a more sophisticated way of understanding that problem without throwing away the notion of responsibility. So that led him to a more complicated progress. And another one was very high from the beginning, but was able to develop even higher, and also the relationship to intertextuality changed. So I think I made genres can direct the kind of thinking. They provide opportunities to practice and learn kinds of thinking. There's evidence that cognition develops over time with the repeated use of a certain genres. These are all within motivated, but it's important to know that with motivated activity towards careers. Everybody wanted to do this. They wanted to become a teacher, they wanted to become reflective practitioners, and they had all these students. They had support of the cohorts and the program, which had clear goals, and the writing test involved reflection. It was all highly relevant writing, so they really wanted to do thinking. It's not just an inward wanting, but their whole, in a way, habitus was directed towards solving this problem of how do I think about the classroom. So it was kind of a spontaneous orientation of the whole self towards teaching. And so, and with the papers, as an opportunity to express this inward puzzle. So that was the first part. There are two more parts. So we're looking at three factors. The first one was genre. The second component we looked at had to do with the disciplinary reading that the students cited and discussed. Let me just say, in the course of doing the research, Kelly Simon, who's the second author, and was doing a lot of the sort of calculation, a lot of the technical stuff, doing all the hard work. She said, you know, something funny is happening here. I coded all these sentences. I'm noticing the ones that seem to have reference to a reading seem to be a little bit higher. And I said, oh. So we went back and added additional sets of code to identify what was going on in the reading. So we added new sets of codes. I won't go. So there's a history of approaches to intertextuality and learning. So there's these methods, I won't go into reviewing them. So they do provide some interesting angles on it. But again, there's nothing that, although Vygotsky approaches would lead you to think the kinds of findings we had, that as you internalize things you learn interpersonally, they become interpersonal, they come inside ways of thinking and perceiving. In the academic world, I haven't seen direct evidence of that. And this, what we have, I think, provides a kind of evidence of this. We added a bunch of codes. The first one was we used the cognitive codes, which we already have from the genre part. Then a reference code. In other words, does the sentence refer to another reading or not? Very simple code, yes or no. And then for those sentences that do make a reference, what were they getting from the reference? Was they getting an idea, a procedure, an example? Then how did they represent what they got from their reading? Through direct quotation or mention only, paraphrase? How did they discuss it? Did they only just present this author thinks this? They said, but it really means the explanation, or I like this idea because, or I have an example from my classroom, or this is a really interesting idea. Let me tell you the further thoughts I got from it. So that's expansion. And then we also counted the length of each intertextual event. That is how long they kept hold of this source and kept discussing it. So this turned out to be even more interesting than we imagined. Okay. Now for this assignment, this is not the case in every assignment, because I'm sure other science students will get other things from their reading. But in all these assignments, overwhelmingly what they got from their readings were the ideas. They had plenty of experience of their own to talk about, plenty of examples. They were learning procedures of teaching through their various other methods. They needed ideas about what was going on, and that's what they got. Well over 90% on all the assignments. Almost 90%, over 80%, excuse me, on all the assignments, they were taking ideas, concepts. This next thing that that we saw was that on every assignment, the sentences that had the dark bars are the sentences that cite other sources. The sentences that cite other sources are higher. So especially when you look at the upper end, almost all the code 9, the highest level thoughts of code 8, code 9, are in sentences that cite. Again, you can see that for hiding out paper, it gets a very clear structure. So-and-so was happening to our students. To the student I was looking at, this is exactly what Brozo says when he calls us hiding out behavior. So there was a single concept which they found from the source and they used to explain all the data. In another paper, again, the same pattern. I'll just go even in the teaching portfolio, when you had the video to talk about, still this tended to happen. And in the thesis, again, you had it. And then in the aggregate, when you added all of them together, again, the same pattern. The higher level thoughts were associated with referring. And then we just counted another way. We did the mean of what the cognitive codes were. Also, in the first paper, students tended to quote. As the year went on, they tended to use forms like summary, paraphrase, mentioned that, especially summary, paraphrase, that integrated what they were getting from the source into their own words. So if you think of a quotation, you're handing the voice of the paper over to the other author. Whereas if you summarize and paraphrase, you are more likely to be keeping it in your voice for your purposes. This is an oversimplification, because actually you're like a conductor orchestrating, dealing with a complex orchestra, right? To bring in all the voices at the right time, trumpets at the right time. But still, it is you in control. And this is a simple measure of how much in control they are of the talk. Also, again, things like, in the beginning they simply tended to present more of what the author says. By the end they are giving their own examples, they are expanding, responding, they are more engaged in equal discussion. And this is what's really surprising, is that the intertextual events go from 2 sentences, a little over 2 sentences, to 6.5 sentences long. Able to discuss the literature at greater length. So reading and citation support higher level thought over time, and with familiarity with domain. Again, these were students who knew how to read and knew how to write. They were already graduates of good universities. But in the domain, they were novices. The thoughts became more extended, references became more focused and more integrated into the thinking, and they seemed to be internalizing concepts from the reference sources. Now, here's the last thing, and I will go through this very quickly. I'm doing okay on time. The representation of the empirical experience in the discourse, that is evidence. So this is another analysis of the same data set, which was done by Kelly Simon, the second author, but this was from her doctoral dissertation. She was looking at slightly different issues, so the codes were different. She was looking at what is that concept of literacy. I won't go into the full logic of that, but she had a code about that moved sophistication in thinking about what is literacy. It's a simple skill up to it's a very complex learning and part of life. And what she found is that over the year, these same students, it was the same data, just she had different questions, that she was looking at, one thing she was looking at, when students are talking about their own experience, or as a young child when they were in the classroom, or their experience as a teacher, what they see in their students. At those moments when there's real life evidence, there was a movement towards higher level explanations. Okay, so that's the core of it. And she came up with some examples. In the first class discussion of the year, this one student made the comment, literacy level in America is surprising. Many struggle to read at the high school level. Very vague general comment, more or less skill level based. Students don't have the skills. In the final paper, I read aloud to him, and after each page I asked him to draw what has happened. This was a breakthrough for student A, since he was both engaged in the story so he would know what to draw, and was then proud to show me his pictures. This exercise made me realize that my students will not all learn the same way, and that adapting to the needs will sometimes be necessary in order to get them to be comfortable with the content. I know that's hard for you to read, but the comment that Kelly makes, this shows awareness of the complexities by which our students learn to read. She's moved to more sophisticated understanding of the act of reading. And then here's another of her slides that sometimes this is an example of the kind of difference between the kind of generalization that often appears if no evidence was considered and the kind of more sophisticated thought that occurred when the student candidate referred to experience. So a lot of the time, yes, this is the more sophisticated, with English language learners, have a lot more going on in their heads than they actually say. There are a couple of kids in my EL class who will not write anything, and I will have to pull his teeth, and he has good things when he says them. And I think what I want to say to them is that it's better to try than not to try at all. So again, there's a more sophisticated thought in thinking about when there's referencing an experience, which leads into thinking about the students in a more complex way. So the use of experiential evidence is a third factor that seems to precipitate more sophisticated thinking. Strategic assignment of genres, discussion of readings with interesting ideas that help students make sense of experience, and use of evidence are all familiar tools of the writing profession. Nothing new about this. But in the literature on teaching and writing, each has been discussed with various ideas and some let's say anecdotal evidence gathered about their value and suggestions about how it might be deployed. But our data set and analysis have made a clear linkage between the use of these elements and development of student thinking. Moreover, while the specific subject matter and concepts of teacher education may be of interest and value to postgraduate students, and to you, I think since many of you work with teacher formation, the introduction of intellectually challenging genres, the discussion of engaging ideas, and the gathering and use of experiential evidence can all be used in every subject matter with concepts and readings and experience and value in those subject matters appropriate to middle and high school students as well as at the university. Again, it is nothing new to ask adolescents to write intellectually challenging pieces, respond to thought-filled readings, and to contemplate experience. These have been foundational activities in at least progressive education for generations, especially within elite education of students being prepared for higher education and roles of social leadership. Sometimes in, let's say, when educational assets are not distributed equitably, students who are less fortunate get more restrictive intellectual opportunities. And it is the elites who get all these intellectual experiences and therefore learn how to become elites. Right? But it's part of our democratic task to make everybody eligible for the elites. Right? But within attention to skills and assessments, right, which often direct baseline skills, at least in the US, these are these fall very heavily onto the poorest performing school with the most economically disadvantaged students. So they are forced down to a pure skills approach to meet these assessments. So then it's very easy to forget what we know. And therefore it's very important that more of you produce results like this so we can show what really needs to be assessed and what's really important to education. So to expand democratic access to higher education and social leadership, it is important that everybody be granted these opportunities early on. So without these mind-expanding experiences, pathways to intellectual growth and sophistication of thinking these pathways become much more difficult to travel. Thank you.
Les van a pasar hojitas para las preguntas, por favor.
She's assigned more reading, but it is important that the students have something to write about. Therefore, the reading is important. It helps them thinking about what they're writing about, but then the reading helps them thinking about it. So they work together, but you have to have the right kinds of reading that really are helping solve problems. So giving these isolated reading tasks or write about reading tasks for something that's not interesting or of value to students. And again, this question of interest or value is not just kind of, oh, I like circuses kind of interest, but again, there is something that, there's a problem, something that is exercising your mind, that the reading becomes a tool for, and that the writing becomes also a tool or a way of articulating the problem you are trying to solve. And it can be a personal problem, it can be a social, communicative problem, but these pieces have to feed in. And the same way with evidence, because we go through our life every day, and there are many things we don't look at. We look at certain things catch our attention because they are important to what we want to think about. Okay, then we have the do you follow your participants to see if they continue in their growth in the classroom when they are teaching? No, we did not actually. This was a wonderful idea, and but we did not do any follow-up studies with these students. It's still possible. I don't know whether we've lost track of it, but that would be interesting. And you also, did you analyze states based on their undergraduate students? Actually, they were high school teachers. So, but that would be, so you're saying to follow up on them and then produce better results in their students. Of course, that is the ultimate thing that you want. Sometimes, though, it's very hard. Education is such a complex task that you'd like to know, okay, you have a certain input here. It will, student performance, and not even just performance on exam, but students' lives will be happier and more successful out here. It's a long way from here to there. And I think at our state of knowledge, it's very hard to follow all the pieces. So we need to cut off little chunks. So if they have these experiences, their papers here will be better. Maybe somebody will show if they have, if they do well on certain kinds of assessments, then they might be viewed as more successful teachers in certain ways. Then maybe their students will improve. But we don't have all these causal connections yet. So in terms of an actual investment, it would be interesting to follow up, but I also have the sense that in terms of investment, even if we were to find improvement in their students, it would be so multi-causal that we would not be able to make any plausible claims on the basis of it. It's even hard within that limited thing that we did to try and get anything causal or even correlational, right? And we had to get an idealized situation. I won't go through all the methodological choices, but working with a program with students who already were good writers, but who did not know this domain, helped simplify our task, because it helps. We didn't know whether they were good thinkers or bad. We could posit they were all good thinkers in some way, but we also could say they were not good thinkers as teachers. And people are so variable by the time they get to adult that it's very hard to sort of get, you can't give them all a lobotomy and then get a psychological baseline, right? So, so I appreciate the question. I understand exactly why you're asking me, but I also say methodologically, it would be impossible to get any really good answers out of it. How do you think how do you think it would be possible to design a hiding out project having college teachers as subjects? As you can, of course, Kurt, I have some evidence about some of my colleagues that many students cannot read or write in a way that shows high reasoning levels. Okay, that's very interesting. It might be politically explosive. But no, I mean, it's true. You do to get people's cooperation in this. But I think certainly working with students in your classroom, you have to identify the students who, whether or not you know their ability to read. I think if you give them assignments, you know who, if they talk in the class, who has read the assignment, or whose comments show a detailed knowledge of a reading assignment from a very general, right? So that could be your beginning identification. And from that, from those students who, let's say, you ask them to write a paper, to read 1, 2, or 3 things, and then you have some measure of how much engagement there is with the actual written text. Right? And then from that, you will identify the students who have less engagement. They may only quote the first sentence, or you know all the tricks that students use. And then you go do some kind of interview study. But it could be you because they would be they would be afraid of you as a teacher, right? That this would affect the grade. So you have to do with somebody else's class. And then you try to find out, well, is it because what you thought the assignment was? You interview them and see how deeply they understood the reading for the first thing. And then if it turns, and then you find out why they wrote the way they did. And from that you will find out whether they read very much in the text or just a misunderstanding about the assignment. And then from there you try to find out if they didn't read very deeply, why was that the case? Was it because they didn't give enough time? Have they read challenging reading for the other course? some of them may have deeper problems in reading, which they might confess to, that I'm struggling with the reading in all my courses. But he said, I can imagine, yes, the answer, simple answer is yes, you could design one. The cognitive demand. As I said, we started out by interviewing the program leaders and the students. And we asked a simple question. You have certain, first, what are your goals for the program? That how do you know when the students get it? Who are the students who got it? And then we interviewed the students who got it. Right? And then we also looked at just what the structure of the assignments was and what they were asking the students to do. So it was kind of triangulating among these things that we emerged with the basic set of codes. And then, as I said, we used them to analyze some text, and we refined them in the analysis of the text to be able to distinguish between the levels. So it was a mixed ethnographic grounding kind of approach. Yeah, is it recommended to give a child 12 years old wants to be a writer? Yeah, it's wonderful. Is it recommended that a 12-year-old child loves to play football and imagines themselves as a superstar and practices all the time? Yeah, I would think so. Unless it keeps them from doing their reading and writing. But I think, of course, any talent that a child has, and you can channel it and you can support it, but it is to be encouraged. If there's something in that child that is finding a motivation, something that is important to them, that they feel that is satisfying and will be satisfying, and they find their future in. Again, unless it's criminal activity or something. But yeah, no, it's certainly, of course, and you should think about how to encourage and support it. And also imaginative stories. You might, at some point, people like to do things that are entirely imaginary, and some children especially like that, and others like factual material. And you might also provide opportunities to explore the different kinds. And just try different fun activities. And I take it this is from a parent. And so to try to find different ways that embed these activities within real social life. Unless the child is very shy and wants to keep it private. But I think it's good rather than the child feeling that it's just something in their drawer that they have to keep secret, but rather if it's something that is not just appreciated by anybody, oh, we love this, but in fact, there's this club of students or this internet group that shares stories like this. Then it's become part of a larger community of like-minded people who are engaged in this, from whom they will learn and who will come to appreciate their stories and give each other good feedback, to just get different ideas about how to proceed with this. Yeah.
Bueno, ya terminamos todas las preguntas, no hay ninguna otra. Entonces, les agradecemos a todos su presencia y te agradecemos